Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Food for Mzansi's Gathered to Grow. My name is Noemdoe, the editor for Audience and Engagement at Food for Mzansi. And on tonight's session, we're talking gender-based violence, agri-community, and agri-rural communities, and what is our collective responsibility. As always, we have our panelists who will introduce themselves. So I'll start with Lebogang. Lebogang is an Agri SA Labour specialist. Lebogang, you're welcome to tell us a little bit about yourself to start off tonight's session.
I'm Lebogang Sethusha from Agri SA. I'm in the Centre for Labour and Development. A little bit about myself. I am a rural girl from the Northwest, converted to a township girl as I go older. Currently in our centre, we mainly look at labour laws and labour policies within Parliament, as well as at a net-lag, as well as at a public level, as to how they affect our farmers, how they affect our rural communities, as well as our farming community.
Thanks so much, Lebogang. Good to have you with us. Bronwyn?
My name's Bronwyn and I'm from SA Women Fight Back. So we are a community of women. We started off as a Facebook group and we're now an NPO where we help victims of gender-based violence through healing and legal advice. We've also got a private Facebook group for women only where women can come to share their stories or seek advice.
Thank you so much for being with us, Bronwyn. And then we have Micealah. She's from Women on Farms Project. She is the Women's Health and Empowerment Program Coordinator. Great to have you with us, Micealah.
I am Micealah Ford. I'm from Farms Project. We work with farm women from different areas, up from Stellenbosch up to Ceres on the various farms, and we do issues with health, labour and land issues for these farm workers, and we empower them to know their rights where those three topics are concerned.
Thank you so much, Micealah. And maybe we could stick with you to maybe talk a little bit about some of the issues that you deal with on farms and with women on farms and the work that you're doing within the sector.
I'm the Women's Health and Empowerment Coordinator, so I'll speak from that point of view, especially since we are speaking about GBV. So for our 16 days of activism against women and children, we used it to commemorate and declare that poverty is violence. The structural causes of violence are economic systems that create dependency, landlessness, insecure tenure, patriarchal gender norms, and unresponsive and unavailable government institutions. For farm women workers and dwellers in South Africa, gender-based violence is normalised. Research undertaken by Women on Farms Project among 51 farm women in the Wellington Farm area in 2020 found that domestic violence and abuse continued or worsened during the COVID-19 lockdown, when partners argue demeaning and degrading words are coupled with physical assault. On farms, male farm workers are most likely to be employed in a higher earning job, while farm women are seasonally and casually employed. This means that female job insecurity creates economic dependence on the male partners and has normalized gender-based violence and chronic food insecurity. The majority of housing contracts on farms are awarded to the permanent male workers, making it hard for farm women to leave an abusive partner or relationship. Farm women's dignity is further undermined by the poor, inadequate, and unhealthy housing conditions, both on farms and in informal settlements. Very often, housing is accompanied by little or no access to decent or adequate water and sanitation. Then there's also the issue of macho masculinity on farms, which has normalized aggression and violence against women. Agricultural work is hard and dangerous, and farm workers are routinely exposed to pesticides poisoning and often work without personal protective equipment. Farm women also struggle to report violence as they are geographically distant from healthcare services, do not always have their phones, airtime, or electricity to make calls. When they do interact with the police or clinics, they report slow responsive times or uncaring attitudes. There is an acute shortage of shelters and counsellors in rural areas. Farm women are activists and are actively organizing and mobilizing in their communities. Farm women, therefore, call for an end to structural violence by placing their unique vulnerabilities at the center of legislative government institutions. So for our 16 days of activism, we once again are running our feminist reparation campaign, which calls for a health tax. And this health tax will tax the 1% of South Africa's richest people and to go into an economic purse, which will then fund things like better healthcare systems, better education systems, and secure land for women and those kind of things that will break the cycles of structural violence that farm women find themselves in.
Thank you so much, Micealah. You've really set the scene and raised a number of issues touching on some of the drivers of gender-based violence, but also the broader issues that women on farms face. Lebogang, is this, in your experience, what happens in the X sectors or areas that you work? And in Bronwyn, I'd also like to pose the same question to you as well.
As I advised earlier, that most of the time we work on a policy level. So we try to see what policies will accommodate or a solution to all these ills that Micealah beautifully put. Because what we see, especially where we have noted on a policy level, is that yes, female agricultural workers are a vulnerable group of society. And from a labor perspective, we also see this from the gender pay gaps. We see it from the equality of employment that female agricultural workers get on farms. As also, we also see it when it comes to times of retrenchment. When going gets tough for companies, we most likely see that there's always the female agricultural workers are the ones also that are first laid off when in such instances. So the issues that Micealah has highlighted are really, really what is actually happening in our agricultural communities, because these are also exacerbated by the social ills within our communities, where it brings our female workers into what we call an economic vulnerability and a dependency financially on their abusers. And also that has been highlighted as well, as that we haven't even begun to touch on the effects that gender-based violence has on agricultural farm workers when it comes to the employment itself, when it comes to worker productivity, when it comes to their well-being, their physical and mental well-being, when it comes to also to their self-esteem as to work, and also this stores us when it comes to employment and bringing more development within their employment space. So these are the ones from an employment perspective that we see as the cost of gender-based violence in our sector. I know when it comes to the quarterly labor force survey that has been highlighted Q3 not so long ago, that our female farm workers make up to 28% of our labor, but we need policies that will address this 20% because they are the most vulnerable 20%. What we have seen coming out of the NEDLAC process is what we have seen coming out of the pub labor is policies that come out, such as right now they're busy drafting what they call the Code of Good Practice for Harassment and Violence. So this will attempt to address these social ills that come into the workplace as well, because KPMG did a beautiful research piece about around 2014, 2015, where they were calculating the actual economic cost of gender-based violence, and it came up to 1.3% of our GDP. That was around 42 billion rand. That's what's been costing the employer when it comes to gender-based violence in the workplace. And this research was trying to shift our minds, especially as employers, as to gender-based violence, not just a community problem. It's the community problem that also comes into the workplace. And especially in agriculture, where the workplace finds itself within that very same community, I think it beautifully outlined why the cost of gender-based violence cannot be ignored from a community level and cannot be ignored from an employer level.
Thank you so much, Lebogang. You're definitely touching on a point I was actually about to raise about the untold impact of gender-based violence in agricultural community, but also the broader society. Bronwyn, in your experience, what are some of these drivers and also the work that you're doing with your organization?
Well, I agree a lot with Lebogang and Micealah on so many points, especially when it comes to intimate partner violence. I don't know if you follow any gender-based violence news, you will see that it is one of the main types of gender-based violence that our country suffers from, and that being in the form of domestic violence, and which often in a lot of cases that we see can lead to murder. And this is a huge concern because the support systems for women when it comes to domestic violence are just not there. When it comes to having to get protection orders, a lot of women have to run around. There's, sometimes up to 3 court cases. They then have to wait for the protection order to be delivered. And often there's no communication. So they will still be living at home with the accused, and then the protection order arrives and it actually makes things worse for the victim. There is just very little to no support. I think out of the 60 cases we've received over the past month, there was only 2 that were not intimate partner violence. Like the other ladies were saying, the problem is that when these women confront these issues and they know that they're in danger and they know they need to leave a situation, where do they go? Never the man that has to leave the house. Often the woman has to leave the house. Then she's faced with the problem, does she leave the kids alone? And then there's the safe houses. If you're working on a farm that's not within a city, there are often not any safe houses within those areas that women can be removed to as a safe space. So they're almost forced to stay in the situation that they're in. Besides that, when they are in the cities, our safe houses are very minimal. And some of them have a lot of things in order that you have to have opened a case to be able to be admitted. Some will let you in, but those with more relaxed rules are often for the brim. So in a support structure side of things, SA Women Fight Back, do what we can. We often have to remove women and help get them to a family member or friend, because that is the next best thing. But, I'm just sitting here listening to what these women experience in agriculture, and I just wonder, what support systems are there for them, if any?
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. Really highlighted a very important aspect about the support. Micealah, maybe you can touch on that, just to respond to that last point that Bronwyn made. And then my next question would also be around the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, we've taken many lives across the globe, but it has also increased femicide statistics in some countries by almost 5 times. So maybe we can also touch on that. But Micealah, firstly, just to talk about some of the support that you offer and others in the sector for women in agriculture that have to endure this.
Well, like I said, they are, and like Bronwyn also added about the shelters, there are very few shelters in the rural areas. But what we do is that we work with shelters that are in other areas and we refer them, we do court support if it's needed. We go to police stations and the court with take our protection orders. We have good relationships with the police stations in all of the areas that we work. So we try, and if the woman need to call on the police, if the woman need help with a protection order, the filling in of a protection order, we try and support in that sense. But it is very difficult because, like the previous speaker, when women do use these services, the question of, so if the man is arrested, the farmer will say, okay, now you've taken someone that is doing work for me and you're not, sometimes women aren't working because they're only seasonal workers. So now you need to go because now nobody in your household is working for me. The house is on your husband's name and he has been arrested, so he's not there. So why are you still here? We can get a family in that will help us and will bring in help the farm. So there's that issue. That is a big reason women rather don't report it, don't. And for our 16 days of activism, we had steps in, we had someone from SARC department, which is also a shelter, but what we wanted to do was get the Minister of Social Development in. As you know, at this time of year, they're all busy, but we wanted to speak about the issue of not having shelters in the rural areas, because this is the one thing that women on the various farms have been asking about. Why is all the shelters so far from them? And so the director of SARC department is the chairperson of the Shelter Forum movement. And so we wanted her there to address this issue and take it up with DSD, the Department of Social Development. That wasn't possible because she could not attend. And even the GBV hotline, our women are mostly Afrikaans speaking. And when they call this hotline, they are told that they must call back later or call back the next day because they don't have an Afrikaans speaking counselor available, which is ridiculous if you ask me, because the woman needs the help at that moment. And God forbid something would happen to that woman in that time. So we've sent numerous emails as well trying to ask about this, but we've had no response and little communication where that is concerned. So there's big issues where support is concerned, but from Women on Farm side, we try our best to support the women that are willing to take that step, that are trying to take that step. And yes, we've also had a case where that actually went through the whole system and the man was arrested and he then later confessed, and so the witness didn't even have to stand on trial, the lady that he abused. There are success stories, but also it's a long procedure. It's frustrating with our justice system and the courts that are always postponing or they are delaying things because of other issues. And especially with COVID, there's been a lot of postponements, even more than before COVID, and it was already too much before COVID. The issue within this pandemic, in this time, the minimum wage was put into place or increased. And as a result, farm owners then tried to give seasonal workers and permanent workers less working hours. This meant they had more hours at home because farm owners did not want to pay the full minimum wage. This happened in the COVID pandemic time. And so this meant that people became more frustrated because they had more time at home and people had more time at home to drink because they weren't working. And the drinking is already a problem from the DOP system that was imposed. So there's still people that get paid in alcohol on farms, men, permanent workers, which are mostly men, that get paid in alcohol, and this adds to the game things. And so yes, frustration of not having money, frustration of not having food in the household, frustration of having to sit in the house and do nothing else. All those kind of things added to GBV increasing the time of pandemic and all those other things that are paired with it, yes.
Thank you so much, Micealah. Lebogang, what is your take around some of the issues that Micealah just mentioned? The minimum wage and the issues around that. Also the case of seasonal work and how that impacts female workers on farms specifically.
I think even from a policy level, what initiated the national minimum wage itself was that need number one, because we know in terms of our Labour Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, that changing employment conditions unilaterally is illegal. And then this is when an employee can take the employer to the CCMA. But again, Micealah has highlighted that these resources are few and far between within rural communities. As Agri SA, to alleviate that, what we had done is that we tried to form an MOU with the CCMA. And what we also did is that we had talks with the CCMA in terms of understand what they, from their commissioner's point of view, when they adjudicate on matters that which are specifically between agricultural workers and farmers, to have that understanding of agriculture and the social ills that are specifically unique in our rural farming communities. That's where they added a little module on adjudicating on matters when it comes to rural areas. What Micealah's raised is important, and I think what we need to do from a policy level is always reach out that message that when it comes to labor laws, we always have to keep our employers accountable. When it comes to labor laws, we must always make sure that give as much information as possible to our employers. As well, we make sure and we put that political pressure on our departments as well that are responsible for inspections to make sure that are they checking these things are done properly, because it is true what Micealah is saying, that we need to capacitate our employers and we need more money in our female agricultural workers to alleviate that economic financial dependency on abusers. And I think what also she touched on was shelters, and I think that's where we need to come in and put pressure on our departments, the Department of Social Development, the department that's specifically within the presidency for women and children and persons with disabilities, that how are we funding our NGOs, how are we funding our shelters, why aren't when we pull in the Department of Infrastructure, buildings or structures or land that's already there, that is just vacant or belongs to the department, why aren't we using it to build these shelters? Why aren't we using it to fund such initiatives to help our female agricultural workers when it comes to gender-based violence in rural communities? Because we know that the locality is a very sore point in every aspect of agriculture. And I think that's where we need to put that pressure from civil society, from non-profits, from organized agriculture on our government as to how do we fund these institutions, or even within these institutions, how can we see how much of their budget is allocated to improving these shelters and improving these resources that are in dire need in our rural communities.
Very important points that you raised there, Lebogang. Bronwyn, maybe we can talk a bit about the support that you're receiving from your organization, and also the importance of having help available for women in all languages, something that Micealah has also touched on, and especially women with lower literacy levels. How important is that as well when it comes to addressing these issues?
About 2 years ago, we forwarded a petition of 1 million signatures to Parliament, and we haven't heard anything back from them. But on Friday, when we resubmitted the petition and made a bit of a fuss about there being zero communication, we actually had a meeting with the GBV Fund and the Women for Youth and Disabilities. I was unfortunately only able to attend half the meeting due to it being kind of put on us the day before. But it was very interesting. So look, there is funds that are coming in. They have not yet been forthcoming about who is receiving the funds. But from what we have seen, there is a lot that is going to be going to the rural areas to help with things like shelters and education and better victim support. Issues that I have said need to be looked at as well is the training within the South African police force, because a lot of them aren't trained on GBV. And dealing with the GBV victim, you can't teach somebody to be an empath, but there has to be some level of empathy there, which is why the victim support rooms should all be set up, but unfortunately they are not. So the next few months are going to be quite interesting. I haven't heard of any organization that has received funds, my network. So it will be quite interesting to see which organizations have received funds and how they will use them, because the support that women are getting, while the MPOs really, we try our hardest, is just not enough. And going back to the education side of things and women not having somewhere to go, most women will leave an abusive situation 8 times before they actually leave for good, which means they'll return 8 times because of things like nowhere to stay, lack of funding, and lack of education. A lot of situations, the woman it's patriarchy, they are looked at, they must stay at home and they must have children and they must raise the children. And this is where abuse comes in. These men know that these women have nothing and nowhere to go, and they've got no job and no money or anything, so they're forced to stay in these situations. So there has to be a level of empowerment in our society that is addressed ASAP, in my opinion, where women are empowered to be strong, to have work, to have jobs, and not just sit at home and be making babies. we live in a different world these days, and women, there has to be this level of empowerment where women can stand on their own 2 feet and don't have to put up with the abuse that they have.
I'm actually amazed that you actually got a response on your petition, because my next point was also going to be around government intervention and the support that other organizations are also getting. Micealah, you spoke earlier about your drive for 16 years of activism. But is there support that you are receiving from government or others in the sector, specifically from agriculture? Because I think we also need to touch on that. And Lebogang, you're also welcome to share your take on this.
From my side, not exactly from agriculture, because I work directly with the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development. But I must say the Department of Health has been more helpful than the Department of Social Development, because every time we've reached out to DSD on issues such as the basic income support grant that we are wanting, the issues of the GBV shelters and those things, provincial will point us to national. National will say yes, they'll attend events, they'll agree, and then not show up on the day. And we've had quite terrible interactions with secretaries of ministers and so forth. But the Department of Health has been very helpful, coming to the fore, being approachable, accessible from the farm women, because provincial level, they've come to the events. At national level, when we had the National Health Insurance event, we had Dr. Nicholas Crisp as well. So I think it's touch and go with different departments, but there's definitely more that can be done and more that needs to be done from their side to support women.
I think, Bronwyn, you also mentioned about convictions and report, and we are staggeringly low in South Africa. What is there for us to do to change that? How do we change it? And if people are reporting these crimes, what are conviction rates? And is the process fair to women? I wouldn't say fair, but if I am a victim of abuse and I need to go and report to a police station, what is the process? What is some of the lived experience of people, specifically in rural communities?
This is a hard question, because I know that the South African Police Force honestly do the best that they can, but it all comes back to education. If you're not educated on what people are reporting, how are you meant to offer proper help? We get a staggering amount of victims that come to us that are turned away from police stations, told there's not enough evidence, told they must just suck it up kind of thing. We repeat this over and over and over again in every media appearance that we have. That justice delayed, justice denied. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of women that do not report cases because the process in South Africa is terribly long. We've been working with a victim for 2 years now for a rape case. There was more than substantial evidence, but the postponements carried on for 2.5 years. And the damage that it does to a victim, having to go back to court every single time and face the assailant, or a family that's had somebody murder their child and they've got to go back to court each time and face these people. Megan Kremer's case, that was the beginning of SA Women Fight Back. Next year is going to be 3 years. It's still going on. So these cases drag out for too long. We were promised by the government to have mobile courts that deal with GBV cases only, but nothing of that has transpired, unfortunately. One of the other issues is often victims they're persecuted. It's why were you there? I mean, I've heard of magistrates asking girls why they were wearing that on their night out. What were they doing in a nightclub having a drink? That's neither here nor there. Are you saying that only men can go to nightclubs and have a drink? We've got one of the best justice systems in the world, to be honest. It's not the justice system. It's that the laws need to change and be fitting towards our times. It's the implementation. A victim should not have to be going in and out of court. They need to have better systems in place and far better victim support than what they do.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn. When I think about the points that you've just raised, I think I said it in the beginning, it's with a heavy heart that I started this session, and it sickens me, to be honest. If we talk about gender-based violence, you've just touched on sexual violence, and often people will mostly focus on physical violence, but we also forget sexual violence. What should we be raising our voices on? And when we talk about gender-based violence, what should we be saying to people? What are some of the things that we can be focusing on collectively? How can we start volunteering with your organization, for example? What can we do with women on farms? What are the policies that we should be aware of, Lebogang? Maybe we can start just talking about that. And Micealah, I'd like to start with you.
What I would say is we really need the assistance to getting through to, especially the Department of Social Development, especially the minister at national level, because that is where the real change needs to start from on top, and we need to have that conversation, because I mean, we've been struggling to get a conversation with her. We can send all requests for the meetings, we can do all of the things on the ground, but women want to speak to her, women want to share their stories and lived experiences with her and ask her what is going to be done, and so that they can hold her accountable for things that is being said and promises that have been made over and over about things that are happening to the GBV courts and all those kind of things. Our stories that we share on social media can be shared, our requests that we put on social media, like our campaigns that we run and those kind of things. Those are helpful ways that people can assist us. We have good partnerships with various organizations that come into our workshops, because we do educational workshops for women to know their rights. So we work with rape crisis, Cape Mental Health, all of those things, all of those organizations. And so if organizations that feel they can contribute to teaching women something that they feel they might not know or might not have heard enough of, or want to bring awareness on different issues, whether it be on social issues, whether it be labor issues, whether it be land issues, we are open to organizations reaching out to us and partnering with us or working with us to educate our women. And even like we were speaking about women's education levels and those kind of things, we are hoping to do some language, writing and reading skills for farm women and those kind of things, because they often feel that these platforms are not accessible for them because technology has taken over. Farm women don't have cell phones. If they have cell phones, it's not the latest or not smartphones. They don't have airtime, they don't have signal. And then again, when it comes to the language barriers that they have also, we do a lot of advocacy and those kind of things, but we also do a lot of education work for women. So if there are organizations that can reach out and assist us with educating our women, and also if they want us to come out to their organizations and or events and partner with them and do some to create awareness of the situations or lived experiences on farms, we are also open to doing that.
Thank you so much, Micealah. Lebogang, I think I mentioned also what should people understand from a policy level, especially when it comes to labor issues, like I mentioned earlier, the seasonal work and the minimum wage and the things that you mentioned before. What can we know and understand and respond to collectively?
Education is key. I think for us at a policy level, as much as policy we can negotiate and draft and pass through Parliament or all these departments, we need that information to, number one, get to the people in a form that's understandable to them, and in a way that it can empower them in terms of having talks and having what we call in labor collective bargaining with their employers when it comes to their rights. Because a lot of the times, these are things our female agricultural workers don't know. For instance, as was touched on, the minimum wage, that an employer can't unilaterally change your employment contract without consulting with you, such as even knowing how much the minimum wage is. What we started at Agri SA is what we call that the e-labor desk, where we advise on, in terms of the Labor Relations Act, when you start working on your first day, your employer is supposed to give you an employment contract where you know what are your maternity benefits, where you know what are your sick leave benefits, where your start date and end date of your contract, because these are the things, you know how much your working hours are, so that when your employer changes your working hours, you know at first instance that this is what we signed or this is what we agreed upon. What do we do then? So such examples, as well as when we look into our Labor Relations Act, when it comes to harassment, when it comes to sexual violence in the workplace, it's what we call is an unfair labor practice. So actually, when such happens, an employer is supposed to have a process within the employment itself as to if such happens in employment. This includes transportation, this includes work trips, this includes anything within your scope and scope or your course and scope, your employment, and harassment happens or a sexual incident happens. Your employer is supposed to have those policies in place so that the moment that happens, the victim knows what to do, knows who to consult, and knows where to go. And an employer is supposed to be an enabler in that process of reporting these cases, getting the evidence and interviewing the people within the employment itself to get as much information to help the victim as possible. I think also even from an occupational health and safety, that an employer is obligated to give a healthy working environment. This is not just about sicknesses and diseases, but also a safe environment. This is what we've seen also with the debate on vaccinations and COVID-19, that this has come into light that there is an obligation on an employer to give a safe working environment. So for me, it is always important. And as I had highlighted earlier, that the code of good practice that's been drafted at the moment will specifically focus on violence and sexual harassment in the world of work, where again, it's attached to all sectors, attached to all individuals, as well as it's to making what is perceived a domestic issue, bringing it from the workplace and showing it how it affects the work. What I like about it as well is has an educational perspective on it, that employers must educate the employees when it comes to sexual violence, when it comes to harassment, when it comes to gender-based violence that is perpetuated in the household or in the workplace, that when it happens, they know what it is, they know how to address it, and they know the procedures that are available, that employers must make those procedures available, or those resources that can help them, such as trauma counseling available, or if it's not within the workplace, they know which resources to refer the employees to. So when that comes out next year, and that's going to tremendously help us within a labor corporate perspective to bring that empowerment at a policy level and bring that obligation as well on the employer to take hands with the community in the fight of gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Lebogang. And you actually touched on my point, and then I would like to open up the floor to anyone who'd like to add a comment or just share their experience or would like to contribute to the conversation. It was specifically around creating a safety plan to protect farm workers against gender-based violence. What is the responsibility of farmers? What is the responsibility of farmers in that specific farming community, whether it is in a remote rural town, whether it is in Wellington, where I live, for example? What should we be doing? Bronwyn, would you like to take this one?
Sorry, are you saying with the development that is needed?
Yes, well, I'm just thinking about, like, as individuals, if I'm a farmer and I'm in this remote area, what is my plan? What is my safety plan? How do I put that in place? How do I create that? Where do I start? What should I be aware of?
I think this is a tricky one because, like Lebogang was just saying, it should also be a responsibility of an employer to create a safe space. I know that my company, we have counselors on hand that we can speak to and reach out should we have any troubles, So I think this should, in my mind, be something, especially when it comes to the farm communities, that the employers are creating a safe space as well and letting them know that they have support. Because I think this is the biggest thing that women lack in all communities is they feel very alone. They don't know who to reach out to or what to do. And often if they go to South African police, it's not the greatest experience. So, I mean, for women, I would say speak out, you have to know that there is help out there. Like Micealah's organization that's doing all this amazing work. This is where people almost need to be funding programs like Micealah's. And Micealah can then do outreach programs to these women or just give them a piece of paper and a phone number and say, contact us if you're in trouble. Letting these women know that there are impulse structures like SA Women Fight Back, like Micealah's organization out there that can help. It's a hard thing because there's so little that somebody can do in an abusive situation. And we've spoken about your mental health. Even if it's not physical, the mental trauma that women go through, it's horrific. So from our side, it's actually more our responsibility to let them know that there are systems out there that can help them and get them back on their feet again, as opposed to it being their responsibility.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. Bradford, I see that you've requested to become a speaker. Would you like to contribute or ask a question to our panelists or just share your thoughts on tonight's topic?
Thank you very much. I just joined the space now, but I just felt this should be made clear to most of the organizations that are dealing with GBV. The problem that we have with GBV right now, especially when it's embedded to the women, the problem that we're having is we are painting a bad picture about men, and that on its own is raising a defense mechanism. I'm not so sure. Is it a defense mechanism, or I don't know what attitude is growing among men that GBV has to like.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding you correctly, but tonight's conversation is specifically around gender-based violence, agri communities and rural communities, and just understanding some of the lived experiences of communities and people living on farms and how gender-based violence affects. I'm not sure if you're asking a specific question to one of our speakers. I think you've disconnected as well. Gugulethu, you're now a speaker. You're welcome to contribute to the conversation.
I think it's very, very important, and I just joined now. I just wanted to maybe share this and also get some insights on our speakers, that in rural communities or rather in farm areas, because they're so isolated, it's always a very close community. And what I've noticed is that women, they feel alone and they've come to accept GBV in the communities because there's not a lot of awareness around it. There's not a lot of support in these communities. And I think it was Bronwyn who mentioned that, the police going to the police to report GBV crimes are not taken as seriously as they should, or it's an unpleasant solution. So a lot of the women feel alone. With the GBV, it starts with sexual harassment, accepted in areas, farms, because if you don't agree, or if you don't show interest, or if you stand up for yourself, or if you tell someone that I am uncomfortable, it's almost perceived as you trying to make yourself different from what is socially acceptable. Women are meant to be sexually harassed. Women are meant to take all these negative and sexual harassment that on, and we speak amongst ourselves as women about these things. And I feel like it's time that get outreaches to these communities to educate women about the power and the support that is available. So I guess my question goes to what can be done about this? What are the solutions that our speakers have, and how can we get in touch and change this narrative? Because it's like we have to accept so many things, because where else are we going to turn to?
Thank you so much, Gogo. I think you've highlighted an important aspect that some of these issues are almost seen as okay in some of these ruralities and remote areas. Micealah, Bronwyn, your comments on Guguleto's experience and also what she was asking?
Hi, Google. Micealah speaking. So, Women on Farms, we work in all areas, not specifically only to these areas, but we work from Stellenbosch to Wellington, Rosenville, Wolseley, Ceres, Doorn, there, all those areas. We work in Franschhoek, Tilburg, and all of those areas. We also work on farm in Kraaifontein. So if women reach out to us from farm areas, we try to help where we can. And then we also started working with schools in the area. So primary schools, and we reached out to some high schools, where we also then do workshops hoping to do prevention rather than cure. So starting at school levels with the boys and girls, we also do GBV workshops with men where we work with Sonke Gender Justice. So we are trying to do awareness and create awareness and educate women and educate men also to their role and how they can help stop the cycle. And also not forgetting that men also get abused, and also so how socialization and gender norms and gender roles impact or what role they play in GBV. It's kind of starting there with changing the narrative. So I think prevention and awareness has a lot. We're also trying to do a lot of that work and trying to do the communities and tell them that what they've seen as the norm, because this is their normal, is not actually the norm. It's not how it's supposed to be. So we're starting at a young age where we talk about socialization and gender roles, where we assign girls to be working in the kitchen and be the ones that do all the domestic work, where men are the ones that work at home, outside of the home, and get paid and bring in the money and depend. Those things that the churches taught us, where the wife must be submissive and the husband is the head of the household. Those things that have been taught to us and kind of showed us that maybe that is the way that things are supposed to be, and we've accepted. So that if the husband does emotionally abuse you, verbally abuse you, and you accept it because you think you're being submissive as a wife, we try and speak to those kind of issues so that women know that that is not how it's supposed to be. And I think when we work at school at that level, to explain to them at that level and educate the parents also to rethink how we raise our children, that helps a bit. That is what we do, and that is what we would hope other organizations would also do, and look at it from a point of the power dynamics, the gender roles, the socialization that we have ingrained in society, and how we need to change those things in order to kind of prevent it to getting to the point of accepting or normalizing GBV.
Thank you so much, Micealah. We have two more speakers that also like to contribute. Brian, you can go now, and then we also have Peter who would like to share on tonight's discussion. Maybe we can go to Peter.
Good evening, Molweni. Sawubona, Dumalang. Always great being here in this agri space. I think my contribution tonight is that we must remember that we are, as farmers, we are part of a community of people that farm with us, that form part of our farming community. Workers, the people working together with you as a farmer, you are essentially a leader. People are working with you and you are a leader. And I think things like gender-based violence should be addressed in your farming community. You should take leadership there. Inform your farming community, people working with and under you, about this. You need to be an activist against gender-based violence where you are. You know, we need to use what we've got, the tools that we've got. So I think it's very important to raise certain issues in your farming community. Speak to the people working for you and speak to them and educate them about issues that we face in our everyday communities. Because so often it's easier not to speak about difficult things, right? It's easier to speak about the positive things in life. It's easier to speak about the things about agri-communities. But within communities, we do have certain issues, and that needs to be addressed. I want to encourage you as a farmer to address these issues. Take time to speak to your people, to address it to them. And when you are not always maybe not the right person with the knowledge, get people in to come speak to them. I mean, we here on our farm, we're really trying to further educate our people with knowledge, because knowledge is power, and we can fight something if we've got knowledge, and we can change perceptions. So whether it is about drugs, about alcohol, or gender-based violence, get people in that has got the knowledge that can empower them to know, if I'm struggling with something, what can I do? What are my rights? And where can I go? And make sure that you as a farmer, you are a safe space for them to come speak to. And that is very important, so that people working for you can know and have the trust that they can speak to you. And I want to end off with this. We as farmers, we are leaders that lead.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your valuable insights. I'll ask my last question to pose this one to Bronwyn. Now, not many people like to hear this, but in Mzansi, men are the problem. The stats are very clear on that. How do we get more men to speak up and say, not in my name, we are better than this? What should we be doing?
It's quite a common misconception that men don't suffer from gender-based violence. I think men just don't come forward as much as women do. There are definitely men who suffer from gender-based violence as well, and it is starting to become a thing that we're hearing a lot more and more of. But it comes back to education, I think, from a young age, getting rid of patriarchy in society, respecting women more, and also doing your part. There's so many organizations out there, women, that are fighting gender-based violence, and we're starting to see more and more men's organizations pop up, and it's fantastic. Langa for Men is one of them. Also, the Men in Black Dukes are doing fantastic work. Instead of sharing a picture of yourself on Instagram checking out a hot chick, post something respectable. It's changing that whole stigma of the way that men treat women and the way they've done for so long that people think it's okay. And it's not okay. It is going to take a long time for us to change the stigma. I honestly do feel that there are a lot of positive things going on, but change does take time.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. And then to wrap up the conversation, I'd like to ask our speakers, which is just Micealah and you at the moment. Lebogang unfortunately had to drop because of connectivity issues. How do we reach you? How do we support you? What pages do we follow? What should we be aware of? Where can we volunteer our time to tackle this issue collectively?
We are available on Twitter, we are available on Facebook, we are available on Instagram at Women on Farms. You are also more than welcome to email me directly at help@wfp.org.za. But we on Messenger on Facebook is one of the most used platforms that people make contact with us. Our contact details are on that page as well, so you can reach us that way. If you want to contribute your organization skills or anything like that, if you want us to come out, if you want to partner, we are very open to doing that kind of thing. That is Women on Farms.
Thank you so much, Micealah. And then what are the reporting structures and what do we do first if we know of someone who is in a situation where he or she is being abused or experiencing gender-based violence? What is the protocol, and also what is the best place to call, reach, and starting point?
Look, we always say to people, you never know what's going on in a situation, so it's very difficult to play the hero. Your first point of call will always be to SAPS. If you've got people in your community or you've got a neighborhood watch, it's always good to familiarize yourself with them because they often can arrive quicker and they are an armed response. You don't want to land up being in the middle of a situation where you could possibly lose your life, because this does happen. For SA Women Fight Back, we do a lot of our work through our website, so I think the best way to reach us would be to go onto our website, which is sawomenfightback.com. You can see all of our social media links. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you are a woman, you are welcome to join our private Facebook group. Sorry, men, it is unfortunately for women only, but that is SA Women Fight Back group. We've got about 238,000 women on the group. We come there to share stories, to empower one another, to seek help. So it's a really nice platform should you be struggling and need a helping hand.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn, and thank you so much, Micealah, from Women on Farms Project. And Lebogang had to leave, but thanks to her as well for joining tonight's discussion. Thank you also to everyone who contributed and to all of you who joined. And I hope that this hour gave you a little bit of perspective of what women and men in rural and agri communities face. And also just this is our small part also in the 60 days of activism. And we will continue to take action and to raise our voices and to share from our side as Food for Mzansi about these issues. Thank you so much once again, and lovely evening to you.